Sometimes in your knitting you will drop a stitch accidentally, or you will drop a stitch on purpose. For instance, if suppose I had a split stitch down here and I had to fix it, I could drop down that column of stitch and fix my problem. So we're going to drop a stitch and show you how to fix it up. First thing you need to know about a drop stitch is that it's not going anywhere. There's our stitch, and to encourage it to drop I have to actually yank and pull at it. So I will do that. Now take a look, just for your information. Look at how much yarn was needed to make one stitch. Isn't that surprising? These are number 8 needles, standard weight yarn, just ordinary knitting yarn. Although this happens to be piece fleece. However, just look, it's a good inch to make one stitch. When you have to figure your knitting and maybe you're running out of yarn, if you keep that in mind, in ordinary knitting, 1 inch per stitch is about what you need. You wouldn't think it when you see a knitted loop, but there it is. You ought to keep that in mind. Okay, now as we have said, knitting is a loop going through a loop. So to fix up our knitting, we're going to put a loop through a loop. Alright, let's grab a loop. This is a good one. And we're going to work our way right up until we get to the top. Think of these as rungs of a ladder, and we're going to go up the rungs of a ladder, putting one loop through a loop. So here's our loop. Now the trick is to get the correct rung. This would be the next rung of the ladder. And just to show you, you can actually use your hand to do it. I'm just going to put my rung over my loop, and now I have a new loop. Here's the next rung. Again, you can use your hand. You can fix it up, loop going through a loop. Or you can put your rung on the ladder and use your left needle and hook it over. Here we are again. Some knitters like to correct their knitting with a crochet hook, and I will show you how to do that. But I will tell you, when you correct your knitting with a crochet hook, you want to make sure that your crochet hook matches your needle size. If you use a hook that is too small, you will not hook it up correctly. So what you would do is, this is a number 8 needle, you would make sure your crochet hook was a number 8, and that's a number 7. You would make sure your crochet hook would be a number 8. There's a number 8. Sometimes the crochet hooks have the number on the crochet hook. I don't think you should get used to using a crochet hook, because you might have to correct your knitting and not have a crochet hook with you. So you ought to know how to do it with the tips of your needles. However, if you have a crochet hook, the main thing is you're just making sure your loop stays open. You're not going to twist your loop around. You're not going to make it any way but open. Okay, then I just get my next rung of the ladder. There's the next rung. You notice I'm not going up to here. I'm not skipping a rung. I'm finding the next rung, and I'm just hooking it through, right up. Okay, and if you're using the correct crochet hook, then you just have to use the hook correctly, and you'll get the right size of stitch. Okay, now that's just to show you how to do it. Let's continue with our knitting needle. Here we are. We've got 2 more rungs left. Here's one. Put a loop through a loop. Now, here's our top rung. Put a loop through a loop. What do you do with this stitch? Take a look at your knitting. There's your working yarn, and there's the stitch. So obviously this has to be on the left needle. It's on the left needle, but now look, it's not correctly mounted. So make sure when you're done hooking up your stitches, you put the stitch correctly in correct orientation on the left needle, and then you can continue your knitting. You should not be afraid of a drop stitch. It's nothing to be afraid of. As long as you understand you're putting a loop through a loop, you can fix it right up. Now, I hate to tell you, but this was the easy way to fix a drop stitch. This is stockinette. You just have those columns of these. What about garter stitch? Alright, here's a little garter stitch dish rag. Let's drop a stitch here and take a look at what happens in garter stitch. Alright, there's our drop stitch. Now, even though it's cotton, you can see it's really clinging. So I'll get the needles out of the way, and let's just drop that stitch down a bit. Alright. Now let's take a look at the structure of garter stitch. We have bumps on this side and bumps on this side. It's like a two-sided fabric. And let's use a crochet hook here and just show you. Some of the rungs of the ladder, as we call them, some of them go to the front and some go to the back. And so when we hook up our correct stitch, when we fix up our stitching, we have to make sure the ones that are in the front fall to the front and the ones in the back go to the back. When you are picking up drop stitches, the question you ask yourself, whether you're doing a design, you know, you might have a textured design or you might have garter stitch, you must ask yourself the question, where should the bump be? All right, now here's our loop, and already you can see this loop is a V. So this loop is part of a ridge between the bumps on the side of the fabric where I'm at. In garter stitch we have mountains and we have valleys. Sorry, this loop, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. This loop is part of the valley. All right, here is our loop, right here. The next rung of the ladder is here. Now you can see it's falling to the front. So then it's got to be in the front. Let's put it in the front. All right, now we have a loop here. We just have to make sure the loop falls to the front. We pull up the rung of the ladder, so to speak, through that loop, and now our loop falls to the front. All right, now if that loop falls to the front, the next one falls to the back. The trick is to get the correct one, and sure enough, that one's coming to the front. The one under it goes to the back. So there we are. Just put a loop through a loop. The next one would fall to the front, and you can see it falls to the front. Let's put that in front of our loop. All right, correct that one. And the next one, you know it's going to be in the back. It's just a matter of sorting out and getting the correct loop. There it is right here. Now some people say, well, why can't you just go to the back and go to the front? Well, you know, you can keep flipping it around, but I don't know if it's worth the trouble. But here we are. Flip that one around. This would be the next one. Okay, now you flip it around again. I don't think that's worth the trouble, do you? As long as you're paying attention and you know where your bump ought to be, then you can fix up your garter stitch. However, I will warn you. Let's get to the top first before I warn you. Right, here's our final bump coming to the front. Put it on the left needle in the proper orientation and continue our knitting. Yeah, you can see I fixed that up and it's pretty apparent. When you fix up garter stitch, because you're tugging and pulling on the yarn, you can often see that. And unless you're willing to go back and straighten it out and pull, it's almost worth the trouble to just pull it out, unknit it, and re-knit it properly. Because if it's important knitting, that's going to stand out like a sore thumb unless you really tension your yarn correctly. So on a dish rag it doesn't matter, but in real important knitting, if you have to correct garter stitch, either do it really carefully or decide that it's not worth doing and rip and re-knit your garter stitch. But now you understand, when you're fixing up your knitting, and it's not just stockinette, ask yourself, where should the bump fall? And then if you do that, then you can pick up correctly.